Joined now by Ambassador Robert C. O'Brien, President Trump's former national security advisor, also the former president's former special envoy on hostage affairs. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be with you.
Well, last night, attacks from Yemen directed, we don't know where, were intercepted by U.S. Navy ships. Do you think this was the Houthis attempting to replay the coal bombing of 2000?
Well, it could be, or it could be the Houthis attempting to attack our allies in the UAE, which they've done on numerous occasions, or in Saudi to further inflame the region.
Well, we've got to respond somehow, I think. But General Petraeus just told me, or confirmed for me, Iran is Hamas, Iran is Hezbollah, Iran is the Houthis. Do you agree with that strategic grasp of the situation?
Absolutely. I mean, we've basically essentially seen an Iranian invasion of Israel, just like we've seen a Russian invasion of Ukraine, and hopefully we will not see a Chinese invasion, a communist Chinese invasion of the ROC, Taiwan. We've got three principal adversaries, and two of them, because of American appeasement, have invaded their neighbors, and we're in a very dangerous time in the world right now.
Do you believe the second invasion of Ukraine or the attack, the massacre in Israel would have happened if President Trump had been reelected?
I think everyone in America knows neither would have happened. You look at Ukraine, it was a total failure of deterrence. Because we tried to appease Russia, we gave Russia two primary foreign policy objectives. As soon as Biden got in office, we gave them the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, shut down our Keystone pipeline at the same time, and we gave them a clean New START extension, both of the things he wanted. And then President Biden said if there was a minor incursion in Ukraine, that probably would trigger a U.S. response. And you look at what happened with Iran and Israel. Iran had formed currency reserves of $4 billion when we left office, barely enough to function as a government. Today they've got over $70 billion in foreign currency reserves. They're becoming a very rich nation because we turned a blind eye to their sanctions violations and their oil sales. And then on top of that, we appeased them with a $6 billion payment for hostages, for 5 hostages. So, what we're seeing here is appeasement does not work with our adversaries. Deterrence does, and we need to get back in the deterrence business, not the appeasement business.
Now, Ambassador O'Brien, before I go to our hostages specifically and reach back to your days as the special envoy for hostage affairs, when you and President Trump and the team brought back, I think, 52 American hostages in 4 years. Is that 52?
I think it was 58, but
okay, who's counting? They're counting. The families are counting. So I want to get to them, but I do want to stress there are 3 conflicts in the world. Russia's invaded Ukraine. Iran has invaded Israel. And by the way, I love that phrasing. It's not Hamas. It's Iran has invaded Israel. And China is threatening Taiwan, the Chinese Communist General Secretary Xi. Are all these 3 theaters one war in your view?
Well, they're absolutely related, and our adversaries have made it clear that they have an alliance, and their primary goal, they have different ideologies. Russia's more of an empire. Iran is a theocracy with a Shia universalist belief that they'll usher in the return of the 12th Mahdi, and the Chinese are committed communists. So their ideologies are different, but their goal is the same. That's to displace the United States as the leader of the free world and displace the world order that we live in. I mean, they want to have the world return to a pre-World War I state where a larger neighbor could invade a smaller neighbor because it had the might to do so and conquer territory and obtain, in real estate terms, a good title to their neighbor, but through conquest. And that's a very dangerous world to live in.
In either his Oval Office address last night or in all of his remarks since the massacre in Israel, has President Biden appropriately put the finger of blame on Iran to focus the world on that theocracy? It's led by a fanatic, and it is a government of fanatics. And if they had a nuclear weapon, my God.
Look, Hugh, you and I never thought we'd look back on the Carter years as the good old days. But that's what we are right now. I mean, Jimmy Carter watched Angola and Mozambique and Nicaragua fall to the communists, and the Russian-backed proxies, and he still naively believed that Russia could be dealt with, the Soviet Union could be dealt with, and could be a friend. Once they invaded Afghanistan, Carter had a change of heart. He had the humility and the integrity to come out and say I was wrong about the Soviet Union. He boycotted the Winter Olympics. And Harold Brown, as Secretary of Defense, started what became the Reagan defense buildup, but it started in the last year of the Carter administration. This administration isn't showing the same humility. They're not showing the same ability to learn lessons from their behavior. which started in Afghanistan, as you pointed out in the last segment, and it has continued since. They really need to come out and say, look, we tried to appease Iran. We tried to make Iran a responsible stakeholder in the Middle East. We gave Iran billions of dollars, and they took that money and used it to support terrorist proxies around the region, from the Houthis to Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq to the Assad regime in Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon to Hamas in Gaza and many more. And we were wrong, and it's now time to confront Iran. I hope
Mr. Ambassador,
I hope for America's sake they do that, and they take a page out of Carter's book and take Iran as our adversary in the region and start supporting our allies.
I have followed your comments very closely since the former president left office. You are very careful not to criticize Jake Sullivan, your successor. Do you believe, and Secretary Pompeo has tried to avoid any personal criticism of his successor, Secretary Blinken, but is their strategic naivete remediable? I mean, I just don't know if Blinken, Sullivan, and Biden can come up with an answer to the world.
Well, look, I think there's a certain amount of hubris with the president, and it's hard to change tack, and it's hard to admit that you were wrong. I mean, they've had foreign policy disaster after foreign policy disaster, and again, it's because of a different view of the world. It's a view that Obama stated in his first inaugural address, that if we stretch out our hand, our adversaries will unclench their fist, and we can be friends with Vladimir Putin, and we can be friends with Xi Jinping, and we can be friends with the Iranian mullahs. And time again, they're disappointed because these are thugs who hate America, hate the values that we believe in, and hate the values that Tony and Jake and President Biden believe in. And yet it's hard to pivot. It's hard to admit a mistake and learn from it. And I think that's what's going on right now.
Does this all lead back to the collapse in Afghanistan, and would that collapse have occurred under the Doha Agreement that President Trump negotiated?
No, and this is what I used to tell my staff every morning when we had a senior staff meeting. I would tell them peace through strength works. It's not just a cliche. The reason we're seeing peace break out in the world with Serbia, Kosovo, the economic normalization agreement that President Trump brokered, or the Abraham Accords, which President Trump should have won the Nobel Prize for, or healing the Gulf rift between Qatar and its Gulf neighbors. The reason you have peace is because you're strong. And weakness is provocative, and even the perception of weakness in international affairs is provocative. And that goes to your point about Afghanistan. When we left office, Afghanistan was relatively at peace. Kabul was safe. We had 2,500 American troops engaged in counterterrorism. We had 5,000 NATO allies burden sharing with us, 2-to-1 allies to American troops in Afghanistan. We controlled Bagram Air Base, and we were pressuring the Taliban in the way that they understood our pressure to negotiate with the government and have a government of national unity. And had there been a withdrawal, I have to tell you one thing, we wouldn't have left Americans behind. We wouldn't have left our allies behind. We wouldn't have left $40 billion in military equipment behind. That catastrophe, there's a direct line from that catastrophe to what happened in Ukraine. And there's a line from Ukraine straight to Iran's invasion of Israel through its proxy Hamas.
So I have two questions for you in our 4 minutes left, Ambassador. What should be our posture towards the terrorists holding 20 Americans, of course, 200 plus people, of whom 20 are Americans? And should we consider getting directly involved with our carrier groups and our naval forces in the Arabian Gulf and the Mediterranean with any attack on Hezbollah or indeed Iran, if that's Israel's strategic response?
Well, on the hostage issue, I've never seen a situation in my lifetime where 30 Americans have been killed by a terrorist organization, Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization. 15 Americans have been taken hostage, and we haven't come after the terrorists. I mean, we haven't yet heard from President Biden or from his team, from Tony or Jake or Lloyd Austin, that what we would have heard from a George Shultz or a Jim Baker or a Connie Rice or Colin Powell or Mike Pompeo, that you can run but you can't hide. I mean, we've yet to tell these terrorists that if they harm a hair on an American head, they'll have hell to pay. I mean, that's how we respond. We haven't gone to the Iranians and said, these are your proxy. They won't shoot a BB gun without your approval. We're going to hold you responsible for the fate of our hostages. So we've never had a terrorist attack like this on Americans without a response. I mean, I like the fact that Secretary Blinken and President Biden are standing by our ally Israel, and they're grieving with the families. But where's the retribution? Where's the warning to other terrorists that if you do this to Americans, there's a consequence for you? we haven't seen that yet. Now, maybe that's because there's some complex negotiation behind the scene to get our folks out. I hope that's the case, but it's very concerning.
What about the idea of American forces being? Well, we are involved. They tried to either shoot at a Navy ship or Israel last night, and our ship shot down the Houthis' missiles. What would you advise National Security Advisor Sullivan, Secretary of State Blinken, and what I believe is a very infirm Joe Biden to do about these things?
Well, look, if Iran invades Israel from the north, they've already invaded from the south. If in response to a move by Israel to root out Hamas and the Gaza, which they have to do, these guys are serial killers. They're not terrorists. They're not even terrorists. I think that's too good of a label for them. It's like having Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy, and a bunch of them living as your neighbor. You can't have John Wayne Gacy as your neighbor who's killed a couple of your kids and then say, well, if you build a higher wall, it'll be fine to keep him as a neighbor. These serial killers of Hamas have to be rooted out. And if Iran invades from the north through Hezbollah, we've got one carrier battle group in place with the Ford. We're adding another one. And if Israel asks for our help, and it's up to Israel, but if they ask for our help, we should be there to help them. First to deter, and second to defeat an Iranian invasion by Hezbollah of Israel from the north. And then that's why the carrier groups are there. If we send them and don't use them in the event of an attack, it'll further undermine American credibility around the world.
Final words, Mr. Ambassador. Any advice for the House Republicans about their leadership vacuum right now and the urgency to get it resolved?
Elect a speaker. I mean, what happened to Kevin McCarthy? He's a friend of yours, Hugh, and a friend of mine, and was a great speaker. It was a shame. It was a self-inflicted wound for the GOP. We need to elect a speaker. We need to do it quickly and show that the GOP can govern, because I'll tell you, in this presidential election, it's going to be the most consequential election of our lifetime. We need to elect a president who believes in peace and strength. It looks like President Trump is going to be the nominee. We've got to replace this Biden-Harris administration and go back to a peace and strength posture in the world to protect America and our allies. And so the House needs to elect a speaker and show the American people that the GOP can govern.